Hi, this is Lisa Loring, Wednesday from the Addams Family, A Blood Frenzy, and Ice. And you're listening to the Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. Welcome back to the Hysteria Continues. We're going way, way, way back in the time machine, back to 1920, which is the furthest I think we've ever gone back. And that's the reason for that is it's a film on the surface you may not think would really fit this Hysteria Continues. It's 1920. It's a German expressionist classic, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920. But rewatching it again, I haven't seen it for many years, watching it again today, I can see why our guest today, Noel Salzman, chose it for us to talk about. Welcome, Noel. How are you doing? And would you say this is the first ever slasher movie?
I mean, I think you have to squint a bit to make it a slasher, but I was thinking I wanted to give you guys the earliest film I could think of, just because I think you guys are kind of film scholars at this point, and I wanted your take on the earliest film I could think of. There's certainly a couple of serial killer films that go back that far. There's Hitchcock's The Lodger, which takes place around the time of Jack the Ripper. But it's Hitchcock. It's more about suspicion. It's about the media. And we don't really get any violence. And then I was thinking of M, which is 31, which is a German film, sort of just into the sound era. And that's about a child killer, child molester and killer. We follow him and we start to feel empathy for him, and we don't really see anything. So I thought, what's the earliest I could think of where there's actual violence or implied violence? And that's what really drew me to Caligari. But also, I know that you guys have talked extensively about what makes a slasher. And I thought one of the ways you can define a slasher, if you're going off of, say, Black Christmas or Halloween, is there's no real reason. Obviously, that changes when we hit Friday the 13th. But the idea of sort of we don't know why, that's what also made me think of Caligari, that it's so indefinable or vague what the intentions are. So that kind of reminded me of some of the things that you guys have talked about.
Excellent. Well, we'll talk obviously a lot more about the film when we get to kind of the main feature, but I'll just check in with obviously great to have you on the show, Noel. How long have you been listening? Have you been
from the beginning?
From the beginning. Wow. Okay. So, well, thank you for being with us from the beginning. So, great to have you aboard for this. It's going to be a fun show. So, and Erik, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. I've been sick all week, Justin. You have to be nice to me.
Well, that won't happen. But
he wasn't nice to you on the Fango episode. It's not going to happen here.
I was lovely
Justin,
too, Erik. Yeah,
I'm an orphan.
Oh, yeah. Is it true that you sucked on something hard and it got stuck in your throat?
Yes, it is. I fell asleep with a menthol mouth lozenge in my mouth on Tuesday night or on Monday night, and woke up in the early hours of Tuesday morning choking on it.
Gosh,
I suppose you wish I was dead.
No,
that's the way you are.
Well, we don't want another Mamakass on our hands, do we? So, what?
Such a great reference. I'm sorry.
In her case, it was a sandwich, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I don't even think that was true, actually.
No. But anyway, I hope you get better, Erik. Anyway, so if not, I'll send you some black orchids to your funeral. So, Nathan, how are you doing?
Kiss my ass, cunt.
That's how I'm doing. I'm totally fine. Nothing wrong at all. I didn't spend the pre-episode whining and complaining to you guys at all.
No.
Well, this is Noel's got a little bit of a glimpse behind the dirty curtains of the Hysteria Continues. But and Joseph, how are you doing this fine morning?
Well, I said it on the last episode. I can't complain.
Okay, well, fair enough. Well, let's have a little chat about what we've been watching recently. And I imagine we're not going to go much further back than 1920. But Noel, is there anything kind of in our wheelhouse that you've seen recently you want to tell us about?
I run a discussion group called, it's an LGBTQ plus horror thriller movie discussion group called Queer Fear. And in 3 days, we will be discussing stage fright. And it's totally coincidental. These things are chosen way in advance. So, yes, we will be addressing that. I don't know what we're going to say about it. We haven't done many giallos, but I think it'll be fun, if nothing else.
Okay. What did you think of Is it your first time watching it, or was it kind of one you've seen before?
No, it's like time and a half, something like that. I mean, it's taken me years to appreciate giallos, partly through listening to you guys, and it's always hard to. It just, because it's so slippery in terms of genre, it's hard to know what they're trying to accomplish. But the interview you did with Giovanni Lombardo Radice was helpful, because he talks about the director being really more of an artist, I think, in that conversation I think Joseph had with him. That was a long time ago, I think.
Was it me or was it Erik? I can't remember.
It wasn't me.
Okay.
This is when you did talked about stage fright. You did a talk through recently, I think, but you did an actual review. I'm not sure, but he was very helpful, and kind of that this particular director is interested in that his original impulses are more artistic and more visual and more kind of sound and image. I don't know. I'm not sure what I think yet. I'd be interested to hear what people in the discussion group have to say. I know Nathan said, I wouldn't pay to see this production. One of the actresses calls it intellectual musical. And I have to say, I'm probably responsible as a director in the past for making intellectual musicals, but there's no singing. It's more like physical theater, dance theater. And I appreciate that they're really trying to do something very different in the stage within the movie. So there's things I really enjoy about it.
Excellent. And presumably, so with you're talking about your past as in theatre, you've never had anyone turn up and kill all the cast and crew.
I had impulses to do that.
I bet you did, yeah.
And some of them had the impulse towards me.
Yeah.
But no, nobody. I mean, occasionally you'll get an actor who's really aggressive and for a little bit frightening. So it's not that something like that can happen and does happen, because you don't know people's personalities or what's underneath when they're going to be in rehearsal. This is a little more extreme in the film, but yeah, it can get dicey with people's personalities.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, obviously, we're used to on Hysteria Continues, eccentric personalities.
Yeah,
so, it'd be interesting to see what your group thinks. Is there anything else you want to tell us about?
With some friends, we've been going through Frank Henenlotter's oeuvre. I really think he's fantastic, what he does with actors, and particularly the extras. He does amazing things with the crowds and the non-role people. And to be a little personal, I did lose my brother not that long ago. So I do find the Basket Case series quite moving, actually. I think his films have real heart. So that's been really enjoyable to go back to those. One other thing, in researching for Queer Fear, my discussion group, I'm looking at this Japanese director. I don't know if you've heard of him, Hisayasu Sato. He's known for these Pinku films, which have titles like Widow's Perverted Hell, Uniform Masturbation, Virgin's Underpants.
That sounds like a toy track list.
How rude.
Promiscuous Wife, Disgraceful Torture. And actually, his most famous one is Lolita's Vibrator Torture, Lolita Vibrator Torture. The titles are great. The films are very tame. They're nothing like Paprika, but they're really interesting. And he's made like hundreds of, Pinkus are like Red Shoe Diaries pushed a little bit in the S&M direction, like 9.5 weeks. He's made many of them. They're made very cheaply. They're only an hour long. And Sato's considered like the king of them. But he made like 4 gay ones, like out of 100 or 150 straight ones, just out of nowhere. and they're so good. And they're more like Abel Ferrara films. They're more about extreme people doing extreme things, but in no way, he's interested in like psychology, but in no way are they meant to shock or disturb. Again, the titles and some of the descriptions make it sound like that's what they're doing, but they're actually quite interesting, and they're definitely fit into horror, psycho. Sometimes there's definitely killing. I don't know if any of them are serial killing. They're really hard to find, but I've been able to find 3 of his 4 with English subtitles. So my group will probably be looking at one of those in the future.
I mean, I've got Japanese films. I mean, obviously, had an interest in all kind of the Ringus and those kind of the ghost story films of the 90s that followed on from that. But I also started watching the Lady Snowblood movies as well, which are very kind of stylized and obviously a huge influence on Quentin Tarantino and the Kill Bill. Those 2 movies. So, I do like sort of dipping my toe into the sort of Japanese cinema now and again. So, I'd definitely look out for those. So, I think it's fascinating stuff, Noel. So, lots to think on there. Is there anything else come to mind?
I think, I tried to get through the miniseries of The Shining. Ooh, boy, it's something to see, I get, sort of. The only one who comes out well is Rebecca De Mornay. She can handle the goofiness and the campiness of what the miniseries is trying to accomplish. So I would not recommend it.
Okay, well, fair enough. Fairly warned. So so some of the miniseries are obviously, you have to have the time to put into them. So it's. Thank you, Noel. We'll look forward to. Well, I'll see if you've seen any of the ones we're going to be talking about recently seen, and obviously we'll come on to the main pick shortly. But Nathan, I believe you've been to cinema recently, haven't you?
I did. I went and watched Hard Eyes. I really loved it. I mean, it's, your horror comedy in the vein of Happy Death Day, to Time Cut, Totally Killer, Freaky, all those kind of movies. It's basically the same kind of feel. And this one, I liken it to, you're basically watching a romantic comedy, but the obstacle for the couple in this movie is a serial killer. Because to me, it follows the formula of a romantic comedy from beginning to end. I mean, it's got all the tropes, but they're also being stalked by this serial killer, and it doesn't take itself seriously at all. It's definitely, like tongue in cheek. I would say it's got some really good death scenes. The opening scene was really funny, and it had a really good chase scene, where she's being like stalked and chased down at a winery, at a vineyard. And I thought that was a great setting. And, it was just a lot of fun. And then, of course, what ends up happening is pretty gory. And, I love that as well. So it's a whodunit. For sure. But I don't know. I didn't necessarily get it. To get it correctly, except maybe 5 minutes before the actual reveal. So, that's that, I guess. But no, it's it's a fun movie, and I would recommend, if you like the movies I mentioned, then I would recommend it.
Excellent. I saw it was because it had a kind of soft opening, didn't it? Because I think it was Super Bowl, which apparently is something which obviously myself and Erik could have no interest or understanding of. But apparently it's kind of it's the third biggest, smallest drop-off for a slasher movie opening ever. So it's actually kind of got some real legs, and it's actually kind of made more money the second weekend, I think, than it did the first, or something like that. But so obviously, because it's kind of interesting concept, isn't it, to appeal to both kind of slasher movie fans and rom-com fans. It's kind of not necessarily two group of people you would imagine that go hand in hand, but I've seen it as well, and I've reviewed it on Hysteria Lives, so I'll give my penniff shortly. But Noel, have you seen it? Or got any interest in watching it?
No, but I've certainly heard about it.
Well, I think sort of Nathan, it's kind of a good. You summed it up pretty well. That is something I noted as well in the review, that you kind of rom-coms they're so formulaic, and I kind of guess in the way the slasher movies are, but from like you always have the couple coming together. And I think I just saw one with the Will Ferrell one that was on Amazon, where you always have this couple come together, they fight, they don't get on, and then through kind of some attrition they end up kind of falling in love by the end of the movie. It's very kind of formulaic, and this is, like you say, actually having a slasher after you is kind of probably a very good way of creating that attrition to cause that kind of romance eventually to happen. But Joseph, did you have a chance to watch it yet?
No, not yet.
And Erik, I think it's opening in Ireland this weekend, isn't it? Are you going to go see it?
It opened on Friday. I'll see how I feel. Yeah.
Oh, of course, yes. If you get that lozenge out of the back of your throat, so hopefully
yes.
you will. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it was. It was a lot of fun. It was a kind of, after the kind of the Terrifier movies where it's just like, and kind of a kind of endurance test, I kind of guess in some ways. It's nice to go back to a movie which is kind of purely popcorn. It's only designed to entertain. And it's interesting because there's a Cary Grant, the best scene in the film is this kind of drive-in on Valentine's Day, because the whole concept is this killer only attacks couples on Valentine's Day. And they go to drive-in and they're showing His Girl Friday. It's a 1940 Cary Grant, Rosalind Russell kind of screwball comedy. And so that's very much the kind of what they were going for with Heart Eyes, was that kind of screwball comedy, and that kind of so it's kind of clever, and it's brutal. It's very gory as well. I was surprised how gory the film was, but it's done in a way that's so playful that it's just like fun, popcorny, and again, it doesn't really stick with you because there's not really much substance there, but the ride is like, it's just a really good fun sort of ride. So I kind of really enjoyed it. It's interesting actually, a lot of the people involved in it are just happen to be gay, like Christopher Landon and the people involved in it, and that kind of comedy comes through. But it's a kind of film that works for everyone. Obviously, the kind of rom-com is very much that kind of boy meets girl type thing going on in it. But it's also interesting, quite refreshing, I think, for a film that is not. It's ignoring the whole Scream type thing in so much it's not kind of self-reflective. It doesn't. They don't know they're in a horror movie or think about reference other horror movies. It's this kind of universe that's slightly kind of batshit, where everything's a little bit exaggerated, like a rom-com is. But they're playing the horror is played kind of straight. The killer isn't made fun of, but they're quite there's a flippancy to it as well. And I think it just kind of works. It all kind of gels together really nicely. So yeah, that was a nice surprise. So anything else, Nathan?
I also watched Longlegs.
Is that the first time you've seen it?
Yes. I'd been wanting to see it, but it was never available. And I've got so many streaming services. I just don't want to pay to rent a movie. I just wait for them to show up on the streaming service. And so it finally did. And so I watched it a couple of nights ago. I really liked it. The cinematography is fantastic, and Nicolas Cage is really good as the serial killer. He's very good in it, and it's got some really good jump scares. There's a lot going for it. I guess the only thing I would say is that when you learn what's happening and what's behind what's going on and stuff, it's kind of very weird. It almost feels like a nightmare, like you're watching kind of like a nightmare that doesn't fully make sense. Because I didn't think that everything in this movie necessarily made sense, but I'm fine with style over substance sometimes. And the style for this one was really good. So, maybe a bit of a mixed bag for me, but I would at least give it, 6.5 out of 10.
Okay. Noel, have you seen Longlegs?
No, I haven't. It takes me a while to see the new stuff, but I have to say, I think Blackcoat's Daughter is one of the best horror films of the 21st century. I mean, it's just so extraordinary. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
I kind of went back and watched The Blackcoat's Daughter, which I had seen. It came out a different title over here when it did come out, but I think I had seen it before. But after watching Longlegs, it's one of the few films that kind of in English came to our cinema here, and I really liked it. I mean, I think it is kind of Nicolas Cage is quite extraordinarily scary in it, and over the top, but also quite kind of contained as well. It's quite a remarkable performance from him. So I thought it was really good. I think it does. It goes, like Nathan says, it goes. I think there's a little bit too much in the way of kind of strangeness towards the end. It kind of lost me a little bit towards the end, but the build-up's fantastic, and Maker Monroe's great in it as well. Erik, you've seen Longlegs, haven't you?
I haven't, yes, no.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
No.
I'll be interested what you think. But Joseph, what about you?
I started watching it, and it's very, very familiar territory for me. I got distracted, but what I saw of it, I actually liked. So I will see it eventually in full.
Cool. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you. Nathan, is there anything else? I don't want to invoke Rhubarb Lady.
Well, I'm going to try to get you not to invoke Rhubarb Lady, but no, okay. There's nothing else.
Okay. And, well, thank you, Nathan. Erik, how about you?
Yeah, the only thing I saw the new Wolfman movie, Lee Whannell's new take, because I really, really, really loved his version of The Invisible Man from 2020, 5 years ago. So I was intrigued to see this, but then I started reading the reviews, which all said it was really boring and a bit dull, and I was turned off. But I watched it anyway, so I went in with sort of low expectations, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's not a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, but it's pretty solid entertainment. It's what it does differently to the usual Wolfman shtick is that once the guy gets scratched or bitten by the wolf, he slowly turns into a wolf rather than, the full moon comes out and he transforms within the space of 30 seconds. So this is kind of like, people are saying it's like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. Now, it's a bit quicker than that because he changes into the wolf over the course of a number of hours. So like his fingernails start to fall off and his skin starts to go all acne-ish or to a degree. His hair starts to fall out. We start getting really interesting POV shots from his point of view where he starts to lose the ability to understand language. So his wife and daughter are talking to him and all he hears is and we see like what his vision is like. He's kind of has this sort of infrared vision almost when he's looking around at people, and he loses the ability to speak and all this type of thing. So it's really interesting watching him sort of morphs very slowly into a wolf, whilst also trying to protect his family from other wolves that were in the area, and also trying not to attack them himself when he sort of realizes that he's beginning to lose control a bit. So I thought it was very, very entertaining and a lot better than the reviews I had read were making it out to be. As I said, nowhere near as good as The Invisible Man, but I thought it was really solid entertainment. So I recommend it.
Okay, because didn't it flop quite hard?
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah. Now the thing for me is that The Wolfman is wouldn't be a box office draw for me. Any kind of werewolf movie is not really my cup of tea. I mean, there are exceptions, of course. I mean, I like Silver Bullet and Howling and American Werewolf in London, but I didn't like the Wolfman from 2010 that had Benicio del Toro in it. I thought that was a bit ho hum, and yeah. So that, like, I don't know. Are werewolves a box office draw?
I don't think so.
Well, was it? There was the movie you saw, didn't you? See Werewolves, Joseph. You saw that, didn't you?
Yeah,
or did you?
It sucked.
Okay.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like lightning in a bottle, isn't it? Sometimes with movies, because movies take such a long time to come together. You know, they get from being agreed or whatever kind of concepts, and then being shot and then released. And by the time it gets released,
movies.
Well, not Nathan's movies, no. But for most movies, and of course, by the time it's released, you just don't know what 12 months in the future, 15 months in the future it's going to be, and what's going to be popular. So it can be probably quite difficult, because you would have thought something a Lee Whannell kind of movie. Based around the Wolfman would be like a surefire seller, but you know.
Well, the only way to make a surefire seller in this day and age, I think, is to include Toya in all your pictures, because she's never going to go out of style. What's the reason no one's ever done that? Shut up, that's the reason.
Well, she was in Jubilee, wasn't she? I remember her stomping around, looking angry and throwing toys around, if I remember. But so, was anything else, Erik?
No, that was it.
Okay. Well, let's say Joseph. How about you?
Just one for me this week. I did a blind watch of a movie called Break-In on Amazon Prime, which is an indie home invasion thriller with a bit of a mystery element, and more or less centers around this woman who's going through a messy divorce, to one of the Baldwins. They got one of the Baldwins in this movie somehow. And she's staying at her parents' house while the divorce proceedings are underway. And there's a masked psycho stalking her throughout the house. And I'm actually having a hard time recalling much of it because it's so bland. But it may be the only movie in existence where the killer is temporarily subdued with a loud music and a laser pointer for no reason whatsoever. I thought that was hilarious, but that's all I could really remember of it. It's just one of those kind of bland, straight to Amazon or straight to Tubi type thrillers. I mean, it looks okay for the budget, and I guess it has some decent story beats, but you're going to guess how it turns out, 20 or 30 minutes in.
Well, you've just ruined the ending for us, because if the killer is subdued by a laser pointer, the killer's obviously a kitten.
Yes, that's it. Yep, that's it. But I planned to see Hard Eyes this week, but I am so broke right now, so I'm going to have to wait on that one. But that's all I've seen.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Joseph. Just a couple of things I kind of rattle through. I'd never seen it before, but it's one I'd always mean to catch up on, was Zero Boys, or The Zero Boys, from 1986, Nico Mastorakis movie. And of course, he did the infamous Island of Death, the video nasty in the mid-70s, but also kind of did some kind of slasher movie style things with Blind Date in 1984. And The Wind from 1986. So this was I'd read this was kind of like a backward survivalist kind of action slasher mashup. And it's one of the few, I kind of guess, kind of those video staples from the mid-80s that I'd never caught up with originally. So it was the first time watching me, and it's kind of on the cleaned up Blu-ray from Arrow. So I kind of didn't know what to expect with it really, but I found it was one of those films that was trying to do too many things at once and never really succeeding at any of them particularly. I read it was filmed at the same location as Friday the 13th Part 3. So you've got this kind of these paintballers go with their girlfriends to for basically a hike, and they find this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and there's someone in the cabin watching them, kind of like a peeping Tom, and then they start getting killed off one by one. So the typical things, you got very much the kind of midsection is very kind of the slasher movie by the lake. It's misty, it's a rainstorm, but it turns out that the killer is there's 4 killers, and one of them is Joe Estevez, who is kind of wearing more like a kind of suit. He looks more like a kind of an accountant coming down off a coke binge than anything. He's not particularly threatening. So you've got this, and then you've got the most bizarre thing I've seen just of, there's Kelly Maroney, who was obviously in Chopping Mall the same year. And she's this kind of character who's this kind of tough gal, kind of come sort of final girl, come sweet girl kind of thing, and she kind of just throws away this line about faggots out in the woods somewhere, just out of nowhere, and it's just like, where the fuck did that come from? It's a very strange. It's still kind of quite jarring to me sometimes when you get those kind of things in these kind of 80s movies. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too much. So it's a very strange movie, which doesn't really, it kind of, it's action, it's kind of teen sex comedy. It's just everything thrown into a blender. And none of it kind of really sticks, I didn't find. But again, possibly because there's no nostalgia associated for me. I'd never seen it before. But is that one that any of you guys have seen? I imagine.
Yeah, the cinematography is amazing, but the movie itself is just kind of so-so.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in a while, but I would agree. I remember it being so-so, but I just remember being like thrilled that it had that Friday the 13th Part 3 vibe to it because of the locations.
I didn't think it was slasher enough for me. I like it, but I mean, I do agree that the line that you mentioned, Justin, did seem to come out of nowhere. Because, yeah, I mean, like, she's portrayed, as the good character. Like, she's not a bad guy whatsoever.
Well, it's not like a lot of John Hughes movies would have a line like that spoken by the, quote, heroine or hero of the movie, and it's just a sign of the times, really.
Well, the quote-unquote faggot was more of a just a general insult. I don't think it was more of a gay... I mean, it was in America, but it was more along the lines of calling someone stupid, at least in the States. So I'm a little forgiving of stuff like that. but it is still weird.
It's not the case in this one though, because when she says it, like they're in that cabin, right? And it looks like somebody lives there, and that's what she says. Probably a couple of faggots living out in the woods or something. And I'm like,
it's just strange for, and also she's supposed to be a psych major as well. But it's kind of, it's possibly that's the least of the movie's problems. Well, one of the many movies problems of the movie. But anyway, that was. One other thing I saw just very quickly was talking of tastelessness. This is probably and talking of giallos or gialli. There was some very tasteless gialli that came out in the late 70s and into the 80s. Giallo Venezia was the Mario Landi giallo is probably the most notorious of them. But I saw there's one I've always wanted to see, and I think Vinegar Syndrome put it out. It's called The Killer Is Still Among Us from 1986. And this was kind of ostensibly, it was kind of inspired by, there was a famous series of killings of couples in cars, like a Lover's Lane, very much kind of similar to The Town of Dreaded Sundown and the real life case that inspired that. But in Italy, around Florence in the 70s and up to the mid 1980s, of couples killed by a killer who was never found. They did actually arrest somebody, but there's still some question marks about what happened. So this was rushed into production in 1985. And it's not particularly good. It's got some silly bits in it. It's got like a peeping Tom gynecologist, which I think is pretty out there. They also have a seance to try and find out who the killer is, and even have the chief inspector of the police coming along to the seance, which I thought was a bit of a stretch. But it's around a woman who's a criminologist. She's a student, and she wants to do a thesis on the comparisons between these killings and ones that happened in 1974. And she ends up kind of like basically obviously being menaced by the killer and then going, but the film's got this very strange scene where she kind of finds out there's a bar in the middle of nowhere where all the voyeurs go, and then they go out and then watch people having sex in cars. So she goes along to that. But it's got, the reason it's so infamous is that there's a scene in real life. The very last killing was of two French tourists who were in a tent and they were killed by the killer. It's very kind of obviously kind of slasher movie, but not this is real life. They kind of basically weeks after this real life murder happened, they recreated it for this movie, and they cut this woman's nipple off and then cut her pubic hair off with a knife, all in unflinching, not particularly convincing special effects, but it just goes to show how it's just kind of very, very typical of the kind of gialli at the time and how far they would go with that kind of imagery. So it's not a great movie, but it's one I've ticked off. Anyone seen that, or any interest in seeing that?
No, but honestly, how gruesome.
Well, exactly. How far-fetched, even. But yes. So anyway, from nipple cutting, let's get to something far more cerebral and artistic. So I think we should head to our movie of the week.
A tale of the modern reappearance of an 11th century myth involving the strange and mysterious influence of a mountebank monk over a somnambulist. Dr. Caligari is a fairground magician. He exhibits a coffin in which he keeps a somnambulist called Caesar. At night, Caesar, dressed in a black body stocking and with a ghostly white face, sneaks through the town killing on the command of Dr. Caligari, who is thwarted when Caesar refuses to kill a beautiful girl, abducting her instead, fleeing over the rooftops with her in his arms until he falls dead from exhaustion. Caligari is discovered to be the evil director of a local asylum, who, when confronted with the body of Caesar, goes mad. This is an expressionist classic showing good and evil, master and slave. And that was from the back of the 1996 Alpha video release of The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is a film I am going to liken to the cartoon Tom and Jerry, at least a portion of Tom and Jerry, and I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Now, I had seen The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari twice before, once during the mid to late 80s as a kid, and again in college during a midnight screening in Knoxville. My opinion has not really changed watching it for the show. I find it very striking to look at with its expressionist sets and this off-kilter monochromatic color, and even I found some of it to be, because of that, unnerving. But of the 3 times I've seen the movie, I can't say I've ever been entertained. Like, I appreciate the hell out of this movie, not only for, being way ahead of its time, but for how it no doubt helped shape the horror genre going forward. And yes, even slashers with a murderous Caesar looking like a right phantom with a blade. But to be as blunt as possible, I really don't care if I ever see it again. And my reasoning is simply time. Time meaning I was born far too late to truly appreciate this on an entertainment level. Whereas, individuals in 1920 who were still marveling over this new form of entertainment weren't yet spoiled on, I guess, the advancement of technology and proper sound and lighting and story beats and pretty much everything a modern movie viewer looks for. That's not to say I was bored with the movie, just that I'm the wrong type of person to appreciate the film outside of what it accomplished post hoc. Being a silent film with placards in place of dialogue, it's really difficult, for me at least, to be emotionally involved in the story or the characters. Silence, I think, can be golden in movies, but when it comes to movies, I think sound is half the process, and for me, it's half the process for me at least. And so more or less, I feel as if I'm watching a neat picture flip book, and not what I or a modern audience would label a proper movie. And I am well aware that this is making me sound very snobby, but, that's just how I feel. But as I was watching it for the show, I was really, really reminded of a period of time during the early 1960s where an animator named Gene Deitch took over the reins of Tom and Jerry, which had always been this loud, orchestral, bombastic orgy of over-the-top cartoon violence, much like the slashers we love. And under Deitch, Tom and Jerry became this expressionist series of weird shapes and flat colors with little to no sound outside of like a jazz soundtrack. And ironically, because of how weird and unnerving it became my favorite period of Tom and Jerry, which, you'd think maybe I would feel the same about the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, but no, I think, cartoons and movies, there's just too much of a difference there. Watching the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was kind of like watching those Gene Deitch cartoons for me, where you expect that orchestral kind of over-the-top violence and instead are left feeling out of sorts and existentially confused rather than rattled. And, on that basis and for what the film is overly, what it's overall achieved throughout history, I suppose I can say it gets the honorary thumbs up of approval from me. But I don't find it a very entertaining movie to watch, and I probably will never see it again. I think this is probably going to be the last time I ever see it again. So, Noel, as this was your listener pick, tell us your thoughts on the movie, would you please?
That was a pretty amazing response, and that's what I was hoping for, is a outside, a contemporary response. I think Justin and I were there at the initial screenings.
Justin, definitely, yeah.
No, we're the same. I think we're the same age. I mean, I feel the same way. I didn't really pick it because it's a favorite, partly because you guys have done all my favorites. But in terms of it being the genesis, I think I'm really glad you guys saw what I saw, that there just might be early slasher vibes going on. I mean, it's probably been written about more than any other horror movie. It's just been analyzed to death, books and books and articles and constantly, every moment of it has been, and I find it pretty alienating too. And I think, it possibly was at the time, except it was a novelty, and it's amazing that it did so well, both in Germany and the United States. I mean, there's controversy about audience, how many people saw it, but the reviews are all ecstatic that this is the future and we're seeing something new. So I think it's more than, they might have been talking about psychological horror. They might have been talking about that being a new, not just the design of it. People complain that, and we would have been those people, like, it's so, German expressionism is so last week. Like, they were saying that in Germany. Like, this is old hat, because that's how the Germans are. And other people said, well, it's a conventional story on an unconventional set. German expressionism started on the stage, and you can see that really clearly. But there's still a lot of innovations. I find it baffling too. I mean, I don't think it's I think the main thing that you find out when you research it is the two guys who wrote the screenplay were outraged that they felt that the framing device was imposed, and that they vehemently disagreed with it, because and other people have echoed that. There's a famous book called From Caligari to Hitler by, I can't off the top of my head remember the scholar. And the idea is that, and it is a movie that's kind of relevant for us, because this was just creeping authoritarianism was starting to happen in Germany, I think. But the idea of a portrait of power gone mad, if you then recontextualize that where the teller of the tale is crazy, the assumption is that it's no longer a film about power gone crazy. I don't agree. I think that makes the film, in some ways, the framing device makes it even more disturbing and baffling. So I think it's very alienating. And the only time I would watch it again is if it was showing on a large screen. I think it would be something to see on the big screen. And with a live, so a lot of times today you'll get a live score with a silent film, particularly one as celebrated as this. Definitely you catch little glimpses of, we really do get as close to knife hitting flesh as you can, I think, get at that time. And it is alarming. Also, I thought it would be a good opportunity for Justin and Erik to make jokes about goth culture.
Oh, yes.
Also, I don't know, Nathan, if you saw, I think there's some Funhouse in here, from the 80s, the film by Tobe Hooper. I think Tobe Hooper made the father character in the Funhouse really look and behave, not that, sort of a modern version of...
I picked up on that as well. The Barker, he looked kind of like the Barker and acted like the Barker.
Yeah, he really did, with a son figure who's under his control, who's kind of pathetic, violent and sort of sad. I just say Nathan because I know Nathan's feelings about Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So you get these weird glimpses, and maybe Cesare, that's another way of pronouncing there, Cesar.
Oh, is it Cesare? I was calling him Cesar. I was like, that sounds kind of Spanish, and it's German. It didn't make sense, so I guess I was wrong.
Well, Caligari, of course, is Italian as well, or Spanish. So I really wanted to hear what you guys thought, because, you can study this endlessly, but I think just what you walk away with as a contemporary audience is the most interesting thing, I think, to hear. Does it match up? I think it goes from being, yes, I feel the stretches of time, it's not that long of a film, but the way that time is used and the way that time works in silent films, yeah, we still feel it. But I thought, well, I'm interested to hear what Nathan thought. I thought if Nathan was, depending on what you're medicated on, does it make it feel longer or shorter? But I do think you can get in the vibe. Also with silent films, I don't think, there's not really a set score. And what you get a lot of the time is modern musical artists doing a more modern score. So I don't really have any big takeaways, except the politics. I just don't think they're that clear. I don't think that you can say, some people say, Cesare is like the German people and Caligari is like Hitler. I just don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's that clear. I think you can kind of, in terms of psychology or in terms of how you interpret what these people are and what they want in all kinds of ways. My main thing is, again, I was linking it to the early, Black Christmas and some of the other early horror or early slashers and later slashers too. I guess some slashers go with, they have no reason. We have to guess what the reason is that's motivating the violence. And so that openness, while it can be frustrating as a viewer, it can also be really unnerving because you're forced to kind of make your own, come up with your own ideas about what's going on. And I think in this case, and I think in cases, I think you can make the argument that the world of Halloween, for example, is that what Michael's doing is somehow related to the world that's taking place in. This is much more overt with all the angles and the very unrealistic stylized sets and stuff and makeup and behavior. Also, I was thinking this is maybe Giallo, early Giallo. You have the like best friend trying to figure out who did it, and you have a very stylized world. So I was thinking there's some of that going on too, but I really think it depends on the imagination of the viewer. So yeah, I don't have any definitive statements or comments. I probably have a different take each time I saw it.
Okay, well, thanks, Noel. How about we go to Nathan, see what he thought of the film?
Well, yes, I was medicated for this particular film. I watched it in like in the dark and just trying to set the mood. And I do think that overall there is a very weird, creepy vibe to it. Just kind of the way the silent movie structure is set up. Like it just kind of does have a strange vibe, and I've really enjoyed that. I do feel that I would partly agree with Joseph in that I do think I was probably born too late to fully appreciate it. I guess the way others and that's not to say, people my age or even younger are not, like really into the film. I just think that, I guess my tastes are elsewhere, which I think probably everybody that's listening to this probably already knows. But I can find appreciation in any movie. So I loved the backdrops a lot, like the town and things like that I thought were really cool. I did love the scene where the monster, what'd you say? How do you pronounce his name? Caesar?
Well, I've heard it pronounced Cesare, but I don't mean to be pretentious.
Cesare? Okay, I mean, no. I want to say it correctly because I'm not known for my great skills there. But
of course, they don't pronounce it in the film, so I'm only guessing. Also, sorry.
I'm just saying it phonetically.
You're right. But I love the scene where he is sneaking up on a sleeping Jane with that knife in his hand. I was like, I can imagine people, back in the day, I would think that would be like a terrifying instance, maybe sort of along the lines of the shower scene in Psycho when it happened and kind of, made people scared of like, taking showers. I could see somebody maybe being like, well, I'm scared to fall asleep because this scene right here kind of freaked me out, which, I could see that. I think it's interesting. Was this one of the first movies to have a twist ending? Because it does kind of have a twist at the end, and not everything is as it seems. Which when Joseph read the description, it kind of told you, how it ends. That
yeah, it stopped just short of revealing the twist, but it pretty much spoils the whole movie.
But yeah, and aside from the fact that I may not necessarily find it entertaining, I did find it very moody and very atmospheric, and I can really enjoy a film when like there's really good atmosphere. People are probably gonna get their torches and pitchforks out for this, but it's kind of also how I feel about Scream from 1981. It's just full of atmosphere.
I think that's probably the first time in the history of anything that Scream from 1981 and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari have been compared.
I'm being a bit of a trailblazer, Justin.
You are indeed.
So yeah, I mean, overall, it would definitely be a thumbs up from me because while, like I said, it may not feel like as entertaining as, say, watching a Friday the 13th movie, there is an importance to this film. And I think it's very important to recognize that, all these movies that we love, there are precursors for all of them. And I really appreciate it for that reason. And I I appreciate the moody atmosphere to it, even from the first scene when they're talking and Jane walks by in kind of a trance-like state. I mean, that kind of stuff I think was really good. And so, yeah, it's definitely thumbs up.
Cool. How about we go to Erik?
Yeah, so films of this vintage are, they're not really ones I'm familiar with that much. I think the only other one from this era that I've seen was Nosferatu, which I saw in the cinema about 7 or 8 years ago. And I really did enjoy that because I was so unused to watching silent movies that it had this kind of hypnotic quality that I really appreciated. I even went out and bought the Blu-ray not because of the film per se, but because I was really interested in the background and I wanted to get, the extras and the documentaries about how it was made and that. And it's kind of my reaction to The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari as well. This is my first time watching it. I can appreciate its influence on cinema, as you guys are saying, and as you have said as well. I'm not sure if it's a film that entertains me. If I'm going to pick a film off a shelf to watch, it's usually going to be from the 70s or 80s, if I'm honest. But I thought it was an interesting film, and I'm glad it was picked for the podcast. I'd never seen this one before, and I was never really aware of what its plot was, so I had no idea it had that Shutter Island type twist at the end. So I thought that was really interesting. I was expecting something very, very linear and very, very simple in terms of its plot. Although I do argue about the cabinet itself because it's more of a box. So that kind of took me out of the film a bit. Would you not agree?
Well, I don't think the wardrobe of Dr. Caligari has the same ring, does it?
No. Are we to assume that a somnambulist is in this context, is it somebody who's in a coma? Is it an early term for somebody?
A somnambulist is a sleepwalker.
Yeah, that's what I mean, but he's not a sleepwalker really, is he? He's just asleep all the time.
Well, it's someone who can basically communicate while they're sleeping and do things while they're sleeping, so it kind of encompasses all of that.
Okay, but he's been asleep for 25 years.
Partly a somnambulist at times, so I know that.
No, I knew it was a term for sleepwalking, but in this context, I was wondering if it's somebody who's in a coma, if he's just basically lifeless for 25 years. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure I would hand over hard-earned cash to go to some circus sideshow where basically somebody opens their eyes and wakes up. I mean, call me crazy. Now, although I do admit that he does apparently he's able to see the future. So my question to him would be, what's the future hold for Toya? And no doubt his response would be #1 hit albums on a worldwide tour. Hey! No, he'd say #1 hit albums and an arena tour around the world. Is what he'd say.
I thought you only told the truth, though.
Shut up, you. I was really interested in the relationship between Alan and Francis, who are the two male characters. They're set up as these two characters who are both in love with the same woman, but I was getting vibes that they were both in love with each other. Alan looks super camp whenever he does his kind of wistful, I'm in love, staring off into the distance type of thing. And there's a point where they're both holding hands as well, which I found interesting. I do like the strangeness that the movie creates. As everyone's been saying, it has a strange vibe because it's a silent movie, because it has those strange sets. And the thing for me with silent cinema is that you have to sit there and watch people's lips moving for maybe 30 seconds, a minute, whatever, and then you have to get the captions to come up to read what they've just been said. And for me, it plays to my sort of modern eyes, it plays a bit slowly, which is one of the problems. I would prefer if instead of interstitials or intertitles, whatever they're called, if subtitles would come up instead to sort of keep things propelling along. As everyone's been saying, it's just a case of being born too recently, because I'm, as you know, I'm the youngest. I was born in 1997, and hey. I did love the overacting by the cast. Again, like Nathan, I thought it was just a style of acting from the time. I didn't realise it might have been specifically employed for this film in particular. I just love that. I thought that because they can't use their voice, they need to overact with facial expressions and gestures to sort of get across the emotions they need to. I did enjoy watching Cesare collapsing as he was dying. in a manner that made him look like Justin doing interpretive goth dance at his local goth club or down at the graveyard, wherever you do your dancing, Justin. I watched two different...
On your grave, Eric.
After I've choked on a lozenge, I told you, I knew you'd be happy if I choked on
or a sandwich.
Yeah. So I watched two different versions of the film this week. One had English intertitles and one that was in German. The German one was much sharper print, but the English one had a more interesting score for me. It had I think it was the one that you might have watched, Joseph, because it had kind of a guitar on it, and it had a very jazzy kind of avant-garde feel to it. It was the
one they restored the blue and the yellow monochromatic colors.
Yeah. So I did enjoy that. And yeah, the weird sets with all the angular and offset and strange looking doorways and windows and stuff, makes it very interesting. If they'd used conventional sets, I think I possibly would have wandered off to my phone to start playing Wordscape or something. So as I said, it's not an era of cinema I'm well versed in. Or have a huge interest in, if I'm honest. I, as everyone has said, I really appreciate these films rather than I am entertained by them. It wouldn't be one I'd be eager to revisit. My favourite films are all huge spectacle films like Alien, 2001, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So something like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is not really aimed at me, I'm afraid. But I do appreciate it, and I don't dislike the film. I just didn't find it entertaining at all, I'm afraid.
Justin, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to say, one of the talking about how it's received. Apparently, some women in the audience screamed the first time they saw The Somnambulist. So I think because there's that old thing is that the people screaming or jumping out of the way of the train coming, the famous image of the train coming towards the camera. So it's kind of a lot of this has been
gothic-looking woman on the flying carpet coming towards the camera.
Yes. Oh, Erik. But or I say people screaming. It's like the first time I saw that Toya video. It's the mystery.
Yeah, they're screaming in delight.
Yes, that's argument. There's an argument there to be had. But anyway, I did enjoy this. I mean, I kind of went through a short period of watching some silent movies. And my favourite's probably like The Unknown with Joan Crawford and Lon Chaney. And so there's a lot of this kind of acting. I think, Noel's on the money here, that the acting's very over the top. I mean, the thing that caught my eye was the fact that it was very stagey in so much that the camera, and I think it's very typical of a lot of those kind of early movies, the camera, there's no moving of the camera just sits there, and it films as if it's a stage. Each scene is kind of, there's no movement whatsoever apart from the people on stage moving around. And I think the acting, again, a lot of that would have come from kind of stage acting where you have to, I mean, and Noel would know much better than I do about this. My understanding is you obviously have to project to the people in the back row. So everything has to be bigger. And also the film stock they were using, why they had the kind of the makeup that they had, everything, in not even just the main characters, but even Dr. Caligari himself had this kind of makeup on to accentuate the lines and the shadows on his face. So that it gives it a highly stylized look to it, which kind of appreciated. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, in 2025, it's 105 years after this was originally seen. Is it a film that you could say you enjoy? I mean, I say I do enjoy it or appreciate it. Perhaps is probably a better word. I think what's kind of for me, which is probably the most interesting thing about it, is that how influential it was. And when coincidentally, I was listening to a podcast on Alfred Hitchcock in the early years, and I was listening to how he went to Germany in the early 20s, the mid 20s, and he was kind of he was very influenced by people like F.W. Murnau, who directed Nosferatu like 2 years after this came out. And I was watching the scenes in this where you have the Caesar, or however we want to pronounce him, going to kill the first of all the friend Alan, and then he goes to kill their kind of beloved, but he kind of obviously becomes bewitched by her. it reminded me similar scenes in Nosferatu. So I think that was influential. But it was saying that how Alfred Hitchcock went back to, he made some films in Germany, but he went back and they said, although I agree with something like The Lodger is much more straightforward, but they were saying about how some of the scenes in it were very reminiscent, so stylistic things that Hitchcock did later, very reminiscent of this kind of adventurous, kind of slightly abstract kind of framing of imagery in the movies. So much so that the distributor in the UK refused to release. He said it was the worst film he'd ever seen, and it wasn't until it had been seen by a critic, by one of the other producers, that then became this huge kind of success story. So the original distributor said it was too German. It wasn't. It was too German for an English audience. So it was interesting. And then all the way through Hitchcock, I think all the way through up to film, well, including Psycho, there's kind of imagery in there which is kind of not exactly like this, but certainly it's stuff that he would have taken from the kind of the German expressionists and the German filmmakers of this time. And also it was hugely influential on a lot of the other silent movies that kind of came out, sort of like The Man Who Laughs and films like that around the time. So I think its influence is possibly bigger, is kind of a bigger selling point for the film necessarily than the film itself, arguably. But yeah, no, I appreciate, and also if the Goth and the Wardrobe is the whole, Bella Bauhaus used the image of César dragging the woman as the front cover of Bela Lugosi's Dead. So it became a kind of bit of a cornerstone, and I think obviously that exaggerated the makeup, the exaggerated makeup. I thought again, it's stuff that was kind of stage makeup from that time, I kind of guess, where everything is painted much bigger so people in the back row can see. And this was kind of carried over, and again, it was all to do with film stock and everything like that. But that was kind of a big influence on sort of like artists at the time. I mean, obviously Susie had those kind of coal black eyes, and it was Theda Barra. It was all that kind of influence, Louise Brooks. I'm not sure what. I think Tammy Faye Baker was more of an influence on Toya, perhaps. With
I don't
that
know
kind
who
of,
that is.
Well, look her up, Eric. I think Noel will back me up on that one, wouldn't you?
Tammy Faye Baker.
Yeah, Faye. There's.
How rude.
I love the delayed.
She became a much beloved figure in America. You should know that, Erik. So
yeah, there was a famous T-shirt, wasn't there? And it was kind of like the front was all kind of like a kind of Turin shroud, but like really gaudy makeup, and it's something like I just ran into Tammy Faye Baker at the store. So anyway, but yeah, so it's I just for me, it's kind of interesting that I remember like the figure from that imagery from way back, and it was kind of these kind of movies would play at those kind of clubs like the Batcave, which I'm too young, of course, to have gone to any of them. But so that was a big influence, and also people like the Virgin Prunes, which of course are the Ireland's big goth band, which I'm sure you know, Erik.
I do.
And they were very kind of, they had their makeup originally was very kind of like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So. That was interesting, but I kind of guess for me the whole slasher movie thing, and again it's kind of like it's I was surprised actually those scenes, that he has a knife rather than strangling people, which I was kind of expecting. It kind of I always thought the kind of slash movie went back to something like The Cat and the Canary, those kind of movies, The Old Dark House. But it's interesting, and Noel's brought this up, and looking back at it, I think you could definitely probably chart a line from this film, and obviously it hasn't got the kind of the gory excesses of the Grand Guignol of the French kind of theatre of the bizarre, which is kind of obviously another influence on the slasher movie from the time. But I think this movie is hugely influential. I think it's kind of really interesting thing for us to talk about. So so that's my tuppence.
That's great. And also, don't forget, we don't really see it, but there is a death. There's a murder that took place before the film starts. And I'm not sure if we're supposed to see a corpse in that bed, but there's a string of murders, so we get a little bit of that sense of, but it's a very short scene. But it sets the tone of somebody's out and again, for no particular logic. The other interesting thing is there's another killer who's like, well, I was going to kill her, but I wanted people to think I killed the other people too. It just admits it to the cops. So again, it's some slashers have, again, the world where violence, and again, this happens in giallos too, of sort of there's a lot of killers running around, and that we're living in a world that's isn't just angled and extreme and distorted, but people are actually it's almost catching the violence vibe or the slasher vibe, and that some are more extreme than the others, but I guess the big twist at the end, we learn that everybody might be equally insane in this world. But yeah, I think you can draw a line to all kinds of, I was finding, again, different genres. I'm far more entertained by Nosferatu. I think Nosferatu is one of the great, silent films. The other thing I wanted to communicate to your listeners and everybody who already know this, but you certainly talked about people who turn their nose up at horror or describe it as being something that hurts society. And I want to say the very foundations of cinema were a bunch of horror movies. This idea somehow that it's, degrading or degenerate, or it's only playing to prurient interest. It's like, but cinema wouldn't exist without, there's a whole slew of them that we consider now art. It's hard to know exactly how they would have been interpreted at the time, but they're unquestionably taken seriously as works of art, even by non-horror fans. So that's something else I always want people to keep in mind, because I want to say, but you wouldn't have what you have, that it's fundamental. All those films are considered great films. Nosferatu, Caligari, Dracula, Frankenstein, M. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about Caligari, and I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about Cesare. There are times when you feel like he's helpless and not able to control his own actions. Certainly when he decides not to kill our leading lady, that's a moment where I guess we get a different aspect of him, although he seems just as crazy in the way that he kidnaps her. But the scene, and one of the most famous images, is him with her in his arms, Cesare walking her, up the slanted roofs of Germany or Berlin or wherever we're supposed to be. I guess we're supposed to be in a much smaller town. And that is reminiscent, I guess, of other horror movies. And is it a romantic image, or is this a kidnapping? Is she even aware of what's going on? So I just thought the knife, even the shadow of the knife coming down on someone's body that's going to be killed, I thought that pushes us, that really sets this apart. I can't think of another silent film or early horror film when we get that kind of threat. And I think the parallel to Psycho is probably a really good one.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, just very quickly, it's kind of like obviously because of the opening shot when you see the main character and he's talking to this old man in this walled garden and his beloved walks past and she seems to be in a trance. It doesn't really make any sense until the end of the movie, but because those both were in the asylum where they are all essentially insane. But of course, those both bits were added on against the wishes of the writers. So it complicates things about how you kind of react to what's going on, because it's essentially if you kind of take those bits as canon, the two sides, then essentially what happens in the middle is a complete hallucination on the part of the main character. But I was just going to say, just as a closing thing for me, was just that also it's the first time in, if we call it a slash movie, that you have that insane asylum scene with people in the background doing strange things, like there's a woman playing the piano that isn't there. And I was thinking it's the very first time in a slasher movie, which has been utilised so many different times in different movies over the years. Dark Sanity. I was going to say all it needed was somebody washing their hair in a bird bath, and they didn't have that. But it's kind of not the first time. It certainly wouldn't be the last time. And that kind of inverted commas, not particularly sensitive portrayal of mental health. But it's kind of the slasher movie is famous for. It is always kind of, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's going to be talking about slasher movies, which are you're talking about horror. You're talking, Noel, about horror movies being seen as the lowest of the low, and being a dangerous society. All these things that people look down on them. But of course, the slasher movie was always the ugly stepchild of the horror genre, that even other horror fans look down on slasher movies. So it's kind of interesting, that where we are. And say, looking back at some of the films, we're talking about looking back at the film 1920s, but often we're looking back at the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and there's a sense of kind of nostalgia to it, obviously, and sometimes the things that would have been shocking to an audience, a contemporary audience at the time, isn't to us now necessarily. So yeah, for me, it's just kind of interesting that what was actually meant to be said. I mean, I think I did read that the two writers were pacifists who were inspired by their time in the German army in World War One and their worries of concerns about authoritarianism but then of course you can read so much into it, and especially you can, with hindsight, you can look at it, build up to what happened in the 30s and the 40s in Germany. But it's certainly even in Germany in the First World War, there obviously was something growing, perhaps. Post the First World War, there was obviously a lot of anger in Germany of people of losing power and influence and all these kind of things. So it kind of wraps it up in that. And coming from a pacifist point of view, I kind of guess that certainly adds a certain element to it. So it's certainly given us lots to talk about, Noel. So thank you.
And speaking of just the politics of it, I read a lot of the classic slashers, the late 70s and 80s, as responses to Reaganism. That might be pushing it, but I don't think it's accidental that the genre was born as coming authoritarianism is, and they've been read like that by other people. But I do think that's what's great about horror, is that you can interpret on so many levels. And also in the early days, I don't know. I mean, I guess you guys talk a lot about early slashers before the pattern was set. So you really didn't know what was going to happen or what the film was going to end up saying. And I think this definitely fits into that category as well. It's early, so it's like there are no rules yet.
Well, that's quite interesting. Always looking at the kind of what we call proto-slashers when the rules weren't set. So like a film like When a Stranger Calls, obviously that was based off his short film, was it The Watcher, or he did the short movie and obviously expanded that. So there hadn't been a formula set by Halloween at that point, even though the film came out later. I think a year after that, I don't think that formula had been set, or had proved to be as successful as people realised it would be. So you have slasher movies that are very formulaic, but also if these kind of proto-slashers, and that's why the gialli sometimes go off in completely bizarre directions, and some proto-slashers go off, and sometimes it's satisfying, and sometimes it's not. So it's kind of interesting. And it's going to be interesting. They always say that in times of times of difficult times produce the best art. So whether or not that means that that's something we're going to see. I mean, the other irony slightly with the Reagan thing, which I kind of agree with you, but of course, another thing that was levelled against slasher movies, that they were very conservative in a lot of ways sexually, with the idea of have sex and die. It was seen as a kind of almost a kind of tantamount to not agreeing, but certainly promoting a more conservative viewpoint around sort of sex and sexuality. So we'll see what comes. So well, I think after all that intellectual conversation, we should bring things down to a far more puerile level. So, Erik, have you got a joke of the week for us?
I do.
It's my joke of the week. It's so fantastic.
Why were Andre the Giant and Angus Scrimm sent to the insane asylum? Because they were men tall. They were men who were tall men.
I can only apologise, Noel.
They're either great or they're not great. They tend to be extreme, like the acting in this film.
Well, I mean, it's been. I was kind of a bit trepidatious, if that's the right word. I was talking about this because I was thinking, how's it going to fit into our wheelhouse before I rewatched it. But I think it's been really interesting, Noel. So, I mean, thank you, and obviously you've been a great guest as well. So you brought a lot to the show. So thank you so much. Before we obviously we're kind of getting to time to sort of wrap things up, but you said you've got your queer horror. Is it queer fear?
Absolutely. It's on Meetup. It's a Queer Fear and LGBTQ plus horror thriller movie discussion group. We've opened it up to crime thrillers, and as long as they're violent enough, they fit into the. And I try to bounce around in terms of genres and in terms of styles. And in terms of overlap, I think you guys have done most of the slashers and giallos that we've done, but there's some really interesting obscure things I found, like internationally. There's a great Mexican trans sort of low boil slasher, and there's a fantastic, I mentioned the Japanese crime thriller, which is pretty extreme. I said it was sort of the divine of Japan. It was actually closer to it'd be the RuPaul of Japan. And we've found things from Spain. There's an amazing gay version of Turn of the Screw set in Spain that I think that's really fantastic. So we found, I dig, and Dutch films and crazy stuff from all over the world that some of them are low key, some are crime, but some are full out slasher horror. And so you'll never know what to expect. And I don't announce the film until right before the one we're going to look at. So I'm still trying to figure out what we're doing after Stage Fright. So it's on Meetup. Anybody can join from anywhere. We've had people, like when we do a film from Japan, sometimes somebody from Japan will call in. We did have an Irish guy who called in at one point, although I don't think the film was Irish.
Did he bang on about Toya all the time?
Wasn't me.
He's much older. He banged on about the Christie Minstrels, is that be? And we get queer people and straight people. We get every genre. We don't talk about people's personal lives unless they're relevant to discussion of the film. And everybody watches the film before they come. But I have to say I'm very open. And even if you don't watch the film, you can still come to the discussion and listen and then watch it afterwards if you're interested. And I'll always make the film available if it's not elsewhere. Legally, just, obscure websites and stuff like that. So we've been going over 4 years, and you'd think we've hit everything. And I always think there's nothing more we could do. And then I find something or think of something or do something I don't like to get people in. But I probably shouldn't have said that. But it's always a journey. It's always an interesting, I never know where the discussion's going to go. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, that sounds like something everyone should check out. So, thank you, Noel, for being such a fantastic and interesting guest. It's kind of been an absolute pleasure. And before we say goodbye, we're just going to find out what we're covering next time. And whose choice is it next time?
Nathan.
Oh, Nathan. Well, this is probably not going to be the Cabinet Dr. Caligari 2, I imagine.
It's going to be just as much of a classic, and I think you all will agree. So we are going to be covering the year 2000's Camp Blood.
Oh, no.
Oh, quit your
God,
whining.
No.
Is it bad? I don't know if I've seen it.
It's kind of like out of the frying pan into the outhouse.
It is a fantastic film. If you've seen it, it's been so long you don't remember, so you just have poor memories. But now, 25 years later, you're going to look back and say, hey, actually, that was an unsung classic.
Right. But anyway, well, that's going to be something to look forward to. So you can't say we don't give you a variety on Hysteria Continues. So, from the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari to Camp Blood. That's quite a sort of a turnaround there. But what are we playing out with?
Would you have a song for us, Noel? Because I could not think of anything. I actually was going to randomize my Winamp playlist, and whatever came out on top I was going to play, connected or not. So if you have a song, I'm all for it.
This might be controversial, but I found a song called Dr. Caligari. I can't even remember the band's name, but it genuinely, and I mean this in the best possible way, it sounds like Toya singing with the Banshees. I mean, it really does sound like that. And it's called Caligari, the song. So, and it talks about the movie.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Noel. And say, if Toya and Susie ever got together on stage, I'd go round to Toya's house and free Robert Fripp from his kitchen, where he's been locked for the last 10 years.
Rude.
But
he's not locked in that kitchen. He loves her.
I did find an interview with Toya where she was asked, do you have a friendship or relationship with Susie? And she says, I've always, I would love to, but it hasn't happened yet. I'll have to find it and send it to you.
I would, yes, it would be. I've got kind of visions of what happened with Robert Smith when Susie kind of he wouldn't wake up and she crawled through, along from one hotel room on the second floor to the next one and attacked him with her stiletto. Really? So I can imagine it might be a kind of similar thing to what happened if she met Toya in the street. But who knows? Maybe they get on like a house on fire. Stranger things have happened.
Everybody's mellow.
Exactly.
Over time, so.
Yeah. So, okay, well, again, thank you, Noel. It's been an absolute pleasure. And, hopefully you'll come back on the show again in a not too distant future. So
I'd love it.
Yeah.
More than anything.
Excellent. Well, you'd be very welcome.
Yes.
Yes, we'll play out with Dr. Caligari by insert name here. Yep. We'll catch you next time on Hysteria Continues.
Toya and the Banshees.
Toya and the Banshees, yes. So, we'll catch you next time on Hysteria Continues. So, thank you for listening and say goodbye to the good people.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
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 Caligari, your synesthesia, you're seeing red.